I'm John Brandt, Director of Professional Practices here at ISACA, and this is ISACA Podcast. Joining me today are Rex Johnson and Tony D'Arcangelo over at CAI. I came across Rex during a presentation at ISACA's Digital Trust World up in Boston in May. Was really intrigued by the presentation that they did and super excited that both these gentlemen can join us today for a podcast on a really important topic. Rex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly. My name is Rex Johnson. I'm an executive director with CAI. I lead the Cybersecurity advisory practice.
My name is Tony D'Arcangelo. I'm a senior service delivery manager within Neurodiverse Solutions at CAI. I manage the day-to-day operations of various client partnerships we have through the portfolio.
So Rex, going back to May when I first came across, and sat in on your session and we had a quick conversation afterwards, you co-presented a presentation regarding neurodiverse talent in cybersecurity. What prompted your respective efforts?
Well, there are a couple things. Cybersecurity, of course, is a growing field, and there is a large need for individuals that can provide that. There's a lot of statistics out there, and I think when I presented on that one, there was, 956 people in the United States alone that were employed with 464,000 openings at the time. As of today, I went to the same numbers. There's 1.129 million that are employed, so the employment's gone up, but the need's gone up as well. And there's 663,000 openings at this time. That's just in the United States. So obviously there's a need for that. And quite candidly, I have Asperger's syndrome. And that is a form of autism spectrum disorder. And I have had an interesting career learning how to navigate that in a neurotypical world. And part of the reason is not only talking about the opportunities, but the fact that a lot of the things that I have as being someone who is neurodivergent, a lot of those traits and capabilities are really great for IT and cybersecurity. I wanted to share this with other people that might be looking at that, as well as others who may realize that there's a great opportunity for people that are neurodiverse to have a great career in cybersecurity.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really intrigued me about the presentation. And, as I sit there and I look at this, I think that we acknowledge that the stigma that's out there, especially with anything regarding mental health, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I too, I have, I've battled with depression and anxiety, and I'm very open about that, right? So I guess the question, my follow-up question to you right now is, obviously. Our own willingness to talk about it adds a lot of value to it. But I'm concerned, is there still this, maybe an old belief especially within like the HR groups and whatnot, to kind of not put that out in main space and not address it up front?
I think there was in the past. And if I can share my own experiences, so 30 plus years ago, I was a second lieutenant in the United States Army. And obviously I got a college degree. I passed what the Army considered you needed to do to become an officer. I was commissioned as a lieutenant. But at that time, I knew that I was struggling with this. And it wasn't something I would typically talk about because 30 years ago, I probably would have had a very different military career if I was open about it. Now, great example of this is you talk about, I remember back then we wore a thing called a battle dress uniform, or BDU, which were fatigues. And kind of an example of the challenges I had is I had a major that would come up to me and said, "Lieutenant, it looked like you slept in your uniform." And I was like, okay, really didn't know what to do with that. What he was trying to say to me is, you need to press your uniform. It looks sloppy. And every time he said that to me, it never connected. I wasn't able to make that assumption. Obviously, that was part of the challenge I had. But fortunately, a fellow lieutenant pulled me aside and translated what he was trying to say. And I haven't had a unpressed uniform since. And I had a 30 plus year in the military, got all the way to lieutenant colonel. But if I had been open about being neurodivergent back then, which they didn't have that term to call it, or if I had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder back then, I would have had a very short military career. But now we are seeing more of an understanding that this is not an uncommon thing, not to use a double negative, but basically there are a lot more people that are coming out. And I've only recently started being open about it within the last couple of years.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate your openness, and I actually had a similar experience. I too was in the military, retired Navy, and I was in the intelligence community, and as you can imagine, like it was taboo up front. And I can look back at different times that I did talk to folks, and it was and it kind of was covered under the auspice of like phase of life shifts and whatnot. So it kind of got subdued, and it was only over the course of the years where, we've kind of acknowledged that it's not as horrible as anybody ever made it out to be, right? It's just, it's life, right? For a lot of things. So whether or not, it's something where it's organic or it's environmental, conditioning, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said, and I do think that there's a lot of value in it being spoken about and advocated for. Tony, anything you want to add to that?
Similar to Rex and yourself, I'm also neurodiverse. I've struggled with social anxiety, depression, sensory issues, and OCD for a long time. Obviously, growing up, the term neurodiverse was never used. Certainly wasn't used in a professional sense. I have 3 children and a stepson, all of which are also neurodiverse. So that certainly led me to get involved in with CAI and neurodiverse solutions. Through many years of working, though, I've learned so much about neurodiverse individuals and how their skills really apply to so many of the fields and roles that we partner with different companies for.
Well, very good. So another question came to mind here, and for the both of you, there's a lot of emphasis regarding very different pathways, right? In increasing the supply to meet current demand within cybersecurity. And obviously the work that you all are doing is helping to address, a portion of that. Do you feel like current DEI initiatives are including the neurodiverse? Do we feel like that's is covered as part of that, or no? Is it being treated separate to all of those initiatives to basically to be a more inclusive workforce?
I believe it's more inclusive today. Again, you look at the skill sets required for cybersecurity that the neurodiverse community has. So data analysis, pattern recognition, critical thinking, the ability to memorize, and really call out bad actors. It really applies to cybersecurity. I think I've certainly seen a growing number of organizations that are willing to look to the neurodiverse community to fill roles in this area.
One thing I found is I got into the corporate environment, and I went into IT, which was a great opportunity for some of the same reasons. But as I realized I was, had skills in data analysis, the pattern recognition, cybersecurity became a natural transition for me. And as I've been in this field, I see a lot more people that are also neurodiverse. And what the neurodivergent person can bring is exactly those skills I've talked about. People that are neurodivergent are very good at being security operations center analysts. They're exceptionally great at threat intel. Oh my goodness, the amount of detail, and you serving in the intelligence, I'm sure you've had some folks that really just focused on that and did some great things. Vulnerability and penetration testing, a lot of things on that incident response, especially if you have to work with digital forensics. These are things that the abilities that you have as someone who is neurodivergent, it really allows you to amplify and use those in the best case scenario. And it benefits everyone else because a lot of this is very tedious work, and some might find it very mind-numbing, but a lot of neurodivergent people get very excited about this kind of thing, and that passion leads to them even being better at it.
That's a great point there. And and a common theme, when we look at addressing this large demand is oftentimes, people will say the neurotypical are attracted towards, the things that market a little bit better, the sexy stuff, right? Um, pen testing, ethical hacking, anything in that realm. But and you're a data guy, right? You kind of rattled off some statistics. You looked at potentially Cybersecurity, at the beginning of this or other sources, and we know that the primary need that's out there right now is what we would say is more on the defense side, right? The blue team, more SOC related, analytical. It's, some might call it boring or whatnot, but at the end of the day, that's the primary need that's out there right now. So it is not, not surprising analytical related fields, make a good segue as well for folks to come over into this. So, you really dug into, where the neurodivergent, their strengths in the technical stuff. And there was something that came up in the presentation regarding soft skills. And so while a lot of emphasis is on the technical skills within the workforce, there's a lot of research out there, ISACA amongst others, that repeatedly affirms the criticality of soft skills. Now, soft skills is pretty broad, right? At the end of the day, it could be communications, analytical reasoning, it's critical thinking, these things that we've already spitballed a bunch of them in this conversation. What are where is the primary, I guess, barrier for the neurodivergent coming into the workforce right now? What have you seen as a primary barrier with job positions or, understanding maybe what's the word I'm looking for here? The translation of skills and maybe expectations?
I think the biggest barrier for the neurodiverse community is the interview process. It's historically tailored for neurotypical individuals. Neurodiverse Solution takes a pretty unique approach. As an example, with our interview process, we do something called a talent discovery session. It's a very hands-on 5-day approach where we're working with each individual to not only assess their skill sets, but really try to identify the right role for the right person. It's getting away from that traditional panel interview style. It allows us to, again, work hands-on at the individual level, exercise patience and empathy, especially when there's a delayed response or communication struggles, which is, again, not uncommon in this community. So, again, everything we do about that within our talent discovery session is built around supporting each individual participating and finding the right role for them. Traditional interviews are not like that, right? It's very specific, down to the skill set, very tailored questions. It's a lot more rigid in nature than I think our form is much more adaptive.
Right. I never had a job where a handshake, how good my handshake was, contributed to my success on the role.
Right. What you described there is, I love the approach that you all are taking. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence of frustration among job applicants, with the number of interviews and so you need to meet with this person about this, but that's just more kind of, it's not really a deep dive, right? And then you're going to, in a market that we know that we message that there's all these job openings that are out there. To have to go through 3+ interviews or even 2, seems a little ridiculous right now. Now, if I put on a business hat, I understand that a bad hire is an expensive hire. I totally understand that, but it does beg the question, where can we be better? And it sounds like the process that you have is definitely helping that. Tony, something you just said there, you talk about empathy, and it's something that I've not got off this soapbox, because in 2022, ISACA State of Security Research, when we asked what the top needed soft skills were in their organization, honesty and empathy fell all the way at the bottom, which at the time was disturbing to me. If I just look at the fact that, cybersecurity is a business enabler at the end of the day. So your goal is to understand, business unit leader needs, help come up with solutions, be empathetic to what it is they're trying to accomplish and whatnot. But then now, already in our conversation here, now I'm like, okay, the criticality of it's that much more. Because if we're saying that empathy is not important, not only does it have an operational component to it, but then there's the human capital component of it, especially when you've got diverse teams and the neurodivergent team member. And Rex, what you had described, like if somebody uses sarcasm and it does not translate well, all of a sudden, like now we're really adversely affecting the work environment. And there's some other decent research that's out there about, the employee experience and what's happening there. So as part of the work that you're doing, do you find yourself having to spend time with the hiring managers or whoever brings you in to talk about the importance of the empathy and leading, this demographic and how they could both be successful in the relationship?
We absolutely do. For each of our engagement, a certified team lead is assigned. One of the main roles of that team lead, in addition to mentoring and supporting their neurodiverse staff, is working with client management, ensuring they understand what it means to work with the neurodiverse community, and building the infrastructure so they can manage a neurodiverse workforce over the long term. It certainly doesn't happen overnight, but again, we collaborate with all the organizations we partner with to make sure they truly understand what that means and how to best support and encourage a neurodiverse associate.
A thought just came to mind here, and it's, and there's lots of great initiatives, and sometimes when you think about, there's lots of good ideas, and sometimes when you go to execute on them, they come across as the wrong way. And I'm seeing there's a lot of value here. So I have 2 questions. One is, and this is really a lack of my unknowing, how large, even a swag here, whether it just be in the United States or maybe if you have any global estimates, how large do we think that the neurodiverse population is? Is there any estimates on how large of a number that is?
I've certainly heard various numbers, but it's growing every year. I've heard up to 40%. Again, I don't know if that is the true current standard, but it's grown every year. And I've been involved with this portfolio and CAI for 9 years. And every year that number ticks up more and more. So it's definitely a growing population.
Yeah, I think we talked about over 1 billion individuals globally identify as neurodivergent. But I think the statistic you're thinking about is, where does unemployment range? And that's where that can run on an adult as high as 30 or 40%. The thing is, you have to keep in mind that you can't take a neurodivergent person and stereotype them. Everybody's a unique individual. And in my case, even though I had Asperger's syndrome growing up and knew I had to deal with it, I was also very much an extrovert and was more outgoing. So there was a lot of opportunities for me to learn. I gave you the example of my fatigues being wrinkled, where if the major had just spoken directly to me and told me, "Hey, press your uniform," I would have received that. And over the course of my career, I've learned certain skills to really overcome some of the challenges I have, to help me be better at paying attention and help also having an understanding. But I think the thing that's important here is not only does the program need to be out there to help people that are neurodiverse, but also people need to feel safe where they work. And that hasn't always been the case. And we're now at a point where you can be open about being a neurodivergent individual without the shaming that you might have gotten from the past.
Well, and I'm glad you, with the explanation and some of the dialogue there, because that was my next point here is, we don't want to stereotype, anybody in, but I'm also, it's like, how do we as a workforce, as a nation, empower and do a better job at the awareness piece of occupations, right? Like, and you all, collectively, we had to take an aptitude test, right? To go into the military, and whereas our model here in the U.S. is very different. It does, there are opportunities out there for folks to, whether they're, formal or informal, there was that book, What Color's Your Parachute, and those types of things to kind of drive interests and capabilities and whatnot. Because the world is changing so much. All occupations are being are just evolving. Every part of the world has been affected by technology, but there's certain things that, levitate. Now, that doesn't mean like someone's, you could be very good at something, but if you're not interested in it, it's not a good fit, right? Like at the end of the day. So I guess that, and these conversations become important because knowledge is power at the end of the day, and we're only as good as the situations that in the types and groups of people that we've worked in, the situations we've been exposed to, and whatnot. And so for all of our listeners across the globe, and they're passionate practitioners. They probably are involved in in any number of programs up early life, late life type stuff. How do we, is there harm in advocating, or do we, or is it just we need to take the approach of just increasing the awareness of and the benefit of any kind of analytical positions or that work, and where they would be kind of suited towards?
I think continued communication and advocacy is everything. The more we talk about the neurodiverse community, the more that we express areas that they thrive in, the skill sets that they have, all the various roles that they can be successful in. The more we get that out there, the broader our message becomes. And by doing that, I think you're going to attract more and more organizations to broaden DEI efforts and hire more and more neurodiverse individuals.
Tony, I love that point there, because it's one of the things that's my personal view of mine is I think with a broad brush statement, I think DEI initiatives are typically thought of much more narrow than they really need to be, right? Like, and I think that's that whole piece. I think the inclusivity piece of it, to me, that's the biggest. That's where the emphasis should be, and that's one person's opinion here, because it's not. Then it's the concern with any of it, it's the practical application, how you're going to execute on a program, and then if the emphasis is on filling a quota, that return on investment reasonably is going to be a lot less than the inclusivity piece of it, which is it's agnostic of race, gender, creed, medical condition, where you live, rural, suburbia, any of that stuff. So yeah, the continued conversation that, and again, I was so excited about that you guys actually went to the table and actually had this conference presentation, truthfully, because it was the first of its kind that I had personally picked up on. And I still don't think that there's enough conversation surrounding it all. So speaking of soft skills, right? So I found that, when we were originally planning this session, I found an interesting article, last year talked, that said, stop asking neurodivergent people to change the way they communicate. And most of it seemed pretty straightforward to me, but that's one person's perspective. And you all are actually, you're out there on the front lines helping, to basically put the proverbial, butts in seats, as you'd call from a staffing perspective. What barriers are prominent right now out there in the workforce? Let's throw those out there, and because I think that awareness is important, and part of it could just be unconscious bias or unconscious activity on the behalf of some. Maybe it's not. I don't know, but I think it's worthwhile spending some time there.
If I may, I did read J.D. Goulet's article, and he definitely is someone who has some of the same struggles that I have had. But when you think about something along communication is a learned behavior. We learn a new language. We learn how to communicate with others. One of the things I had to learn and pick up on was body language. It was not something that's intuitive to me, and it's something I do now. And people seem to think I'm very good at it, and I pick up on things even neurotypical people don't, because I've started studying it like code. But the thing is, everybody wants to be heard, and they don't want to be misunderstood. And it is very frustrating when you communicate something and you think you say one thing, and someone through their filters interpret it as something entirely different. So I appreciate the article. I think a lot of times, just as in the example I gave, going back to the uniform story, I just needed someone to translate. And sometimes once that translation happens, that really takes a lot of the barriers down, and you can start with that. But those are kind of some of the same things. Is we got to realize we don't all communicate the same way. Even neurotypical people communicate different than others. And you could say something totally be misinterpreted by someone else as well.
I can't help but sit here and think about, when we talk about communication at large, and we look at the impact that technology has had on society, right? And the lack of impersonal communication that's transpiring. Like, on one hand, I wonder whether the neurotypical are actually more disadvantaged at this point with that moving forward, because to your point, body language matters. Texting, right? You don't get texting, email, or whatnot, like tone and emphasis and all of that is very tough to come across, right? So I have zero illusions that soft skills will fall as an important factor within the cybersecurity workforce, but I also have zero illusions that this is limited to us. Like through my own studies and interactions with folks, this is a challenge that's plaguing all occupations right now, and it seems to be getting worse over the years. That begs the question, with an aging workforce, to which cybersecurity is, what responsibilities are on hiring managers to kind of pick up the torch here and to make sure that we're seeing sizable gains with knocking down the barriers for neurodivergent individuals, recognizing that if we've grown pretty accustomed to not dealing with people, right, at the end of the day. And the pandemic obviously didn't help much in that regard when we were doing a lot of virtual stuff.
I think the responsibility goes beyond just the hiring managers. It starts at the top with the CEOs and building organizations that support a diverse workforce, educating your entire organization that they need to be innovative and out of the box thinkers.
But I appreciate, that point there, Tony. The CEOs from the top down is obviously important. Especially with your larger organizations, the reality is that hiring managers is pretty much that first line, right, on a lot of things.
Absolutely, it does start there. You have to have a hiring manager that is open to the idea of working with a neurodiverse individual and understands what that truly means, and then working within their org to understand that all their subordinates understand what that means. Communication, collaboration, it's ultimately going to determine the success in this area.
Well, I want to say I'm grateful to be at a time when a lot of we've become aware of neurodivergent people and their talents and what they can offer. And having had to go through most of my career hiding that, it's great to be able to talk about that and be open about that. And I think as we look ahead, there are a lot of opportunities, not just to think, okay, I can put this person in a data analysis role and they'll stay there the rest of their life. There have been other people. There was a 3-star naval admiral who came out saying that he was on the autism spectrum. He made 3 stars and he was a leader and he was in charge of people and he was very good at strategy and leadership, but he was a neurodivergent individual. So there's not only other opportunities for them to have great jobs, there's opportunities for them to be leading and helping others. And one of the things I want to do is share my experiences with others and help them be successful in their careers.
I hope our listeners got a lot out of this, and I hope it's the beginning of many conversations and communications on the topic here. It's going to take a village, right? We all know that. There's some, the size estimates of how many people we need are pretty excessive. The accuracy of that only time will tell, right? But at the end of the day, we do know unequivocally that there are not enough folks for every open position right now. And Phil, which you talked about, Tony, right? The right person for the right position. We need to be leading forward with that right now, in all regards. And in opportunities and initiatives such as, the good work that you guys are doing out there, CAI, it's going to help chip away at that. How fast it scales, ultimately, that's going to be up to industry, to make some adjustments on their end. But this is a really good conversation. I really appreciate both of you joining me today for this conversation. I'm John Brandt, and this is ISACA Podcast.